and also as administrators at college level and at secondary and elementary level, and talking about those things that are short term talking about things about finding good candidates, mentoring candidates, because it's not just about hiring, but it's about mentoring and a culture and allowing them to be acculturated in this particular life. The second is long term. How do we expand this whole conversation about getting more people into education? For instance, I am a member of the 2% Club, which up until 5 years ago was the 1% Club. And that is, I am a Black male who works in education K through 12. So when you talk about recruiting teachers from diverse backgrounds, part of the issue is the pool is small. And tonight, what we do is we have people from diverse backgrounds who will share those particular areas and talk about it from both short-term and long-term. So what we're going to do is I will introduce each of the panelists. We ask panelists to speak about 5 or so minutes about their areas on this, and then we'll have a question and answer. For folks who have questions as we go along, we ask that you put it in the chat box. And at the end, Alex or whoever else he designates will share those questions out for us to have those discussions for tonight. So first of all, I would like to invite the past president of the mainline NAACP, Ms. Diana Robinson, who will do an introduction about talking about the history overview of this from a historical perspective in the connection in the mainline NAACP. Ms. Robinson.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I want to start off with a quote from Frederick Douglass that says, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe." So in order to have a basic discussion historically and to understand that the issues dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion historically was not a concept that was in place. All the Jim Crow laws were created systems basically to separate, that were separate and unequal. And as part of that, it gave rise to basically Carter G. Woods's quote when he states that you can control a man's thinking. If you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand here or go there. He will find his proper place and will stay on it. And just for a moment, I want to talk about the proper place. And unfortunately, that is part of the problem that involves the inherent system of racism that has been in place for years. So when we talk about who's writing the narrative for students and what is considered what they consider to be their proper place, that is the system that is going to actually determine by what is taught, by what resources are available, how students are separated within a school system. And basically that is what we have. So when we start to talk about NAACP has been involved for years. When we go back to the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954, which actually overturned the separate but equal doctrine to say that separate was not equal. And one of the cases on the main line where we talked about the Tredyffrin Easttown case back in 1932 to 34, where a school district, which started out to be, which was actually an integrated school district, built a new school and decided in 1932, in building a brand new school, that they at that point was going to segregate by moving the white students to the new school and telling the black students that they were going to remain in the former school, in which parents rebelled and at that point in time actually refused to send their children to school. This went on for 2 years. And then after that 2 years, through the battle of the courts, they were able to once again integrate the schools where they allowed the students to then attend the new school. But they had lost 2 years of school. They actually went to that school at the grade level that they left. So they put them 2 years behind, but parents felt it was worth that to get the right to be in a school that had the same resources, the same um, the same ability, the same opportunities. And I think that's another key word is the opportunity. So when we talk about the proper place and who's writing the narrative and what someone feels um, should be the opportunity or lack of opportunity for students, this is how these systems that are still in place. And until we start to dismantle these systems, we will continue to have the same results. And so, just to conclude, basically, we know that on the mainline area where you have students, their school systems of white majority, and their school systems that are labeled top school districts, and yet within those school districts, there are students of color who are not having the same experiences as most of the white students. That is the part that has to change. And so when we start to think of the narrative that's being written, who's considered defining the proper place for students, and what controls, what is it you're trying to control by putting certain things in place? And so Dr. Kendi says, what if we realize the best way to ensure an effective educational system is not by standardizing our curricula and tests, but by standardizing the opportunities available to all students? So as we continue to have this conversation and to talk about diversity on all levels, I would like for us to be able to think about how do we start to standardize the opportunities available to all students so that the students of color will they will define their proper place and they will have the opportunities to succeed in the same way as other students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson, and thank you for, as I said, your service in the NAACP over the years. And like Ms. Robinson said, that it's important to talk about the narrative, talking about where, how do we look at not just about recruiting, because this can't be a conversation about checking a box and saying that we've recruited teachers of color and diversity. It's about how do we make our districts acculturated to the point that it supports children and the teachers across the board. And our first speaker that we're going to invite is Dr. Laura Roy. Dr. Roy represents that long-term piece that we're talking about. She's the chair of the education department at LaSalle University, and she'll talk about from the perspective of the university perspective about recruiting and educating around these areas. Dr. Roy.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. I appreciate that. So thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here with everyone in this room. I'm the chair of the education department at LaSalle University, and I've been there for about 4 years. I was at Penn State Harrisburg before that. And in coming to LaSalle, one of the things I've really been focusing on is really thinking deeper than DEI. And my colleague, Rochelle Peterson-Ansari, talks about it as radical DEI. So what are we really doing to name the problem and fix it? And to realize that a lot of institutions have a lot of talk around diversity, There are climate surveys, there are discussions, there are workshops, there are professional developments, but there's not a lot of action after that. I think the biggest thing for me, I'm thinking about climate surveys. We ask a lot of questions about, oh, we have to investigate whether there's a problem at our institution. And I push back and say, there's a problem. Right? Like, institutional racism is a problem everywhere. Systemic racism is a problem everywhere. That's why we call it systemic, right? So at some point, I think we can stop wondering whether our institutions have an issue and start working toward looking at the existing data, what works. And with hiring, the biggest problem with hiring is just what Dr. Stevenson said, that, one, and Diana Robertson, happy to work with Candace. Wanted to say hello. Such a wonderful faculty member at LaSalle, chair of the public health department at LaSalle, and spoke at an event a few years ago that the NAACP sponsored, looking at diversity on the main line and school to prison pipeline problems. So with hiring, one of the things that we've been looking at is, where do we start? LaSalle is I don't know if I can share if I could share my screen, I could show you a couple of things. I don't have to, but I can. It might be easier to be able to see it. But LaSalle is considered a PWI, predominantly white institution, because our faculty is 90% white. That is not our student population. We have nearly 40% students of color. Our teacher education department does not look like that, however. So the problem really starts much earlier on about dismantling barriers and increasing access for those who want to be teachers. Let me just open this up. Thank you. I'm gonna try not to talk too long, but I just wanted to share with you kind of what we're doing as the first step. And I do some work. I'm doing a 3-part series about anti-racist abolitionist work with actually TE. I did my first one last month, doing another one in March. But as we all know, Pennsylvania has a huge problem with teacher diversity in general. Only 4% in Pennsylvania. It's more like 18% nationally. That's abysmal, right? Racial isolation and segregation continue. As I said, LaSalle, we have a diverse student population, but our faculty does not reflect that. So one of the things that I worked toward was to really change the face of our own department. While our faculty at LaSalle is, close around 90% white, my department is more like 60%. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done to make a change there. And 3 of our faculty staff members have been involved in the Aspire to Educate program. I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but it's federal money that was given to states to increase the diversity in the teacher education pipeline. The money didn't, the RFP was not released this summer, but I was part of one of the founding members of the A2E Higher Education Consortium. Now there were about 10 of us in the beginning. Now there's almost 50 or more. We are working to create toolkits that districts can use around mentoring, around retention, around hiring, and around the culturally relevant sustaining education competencies. There are 9 competencies that I can share with all of you. I can send it to Alex to share later. And there's a toolkit around them, so rubrics for how to do this work. And so at LaSalle, what we're trying to do is professionally develop our own faculty, because I don't believe that we should be in the business of recruiting teachers of color into our program if our faculty and staff do not understand anti-racist and abolitionist pedagogy, if we ourselves do not have a strong knowledge in this area. So we are doing workshops for our faculty and staff. Sometimes it's hard to tell really smart people that they don't know stuff, but we're trying to admit that we don't all of us have a deep expertise here and that we need to learn. We're being very intentional about naming the problem. We're calling it racial oppression. We're calling it systemic racism. We're not talking about it as a diversity initiative. We are working to seek funding to recruit, support, mentor, and retain pre-service teachers. As Dr. Stevenson said, you know, you can't retain people, you can't recruit people into a program and not do the work to support them. And part of that work is making sure that our white faculty and white students understand how to be culturally relevant and sustaining and anti-racist. So that's another big shift for us. The hiring practices, not just in our full-time and tenured faculty. I've worked really hard to hire adjuncts who work in Philly schools, who have an understanding of social justice work and racial equity work. And then we've been funded for a early childhood evening program for career advancement from AA to BA in early childhood. And that program is not just tuition funds, but also any kind of transition support that students might need to help them become a teacher. So this is kind of the work that's happening at LaSalle that I wanted to share with you. And I'm happy to anybody on the call, you know, have a follow-up conversation or share any other details. I just don't want to take up all of the time tonight. But thank you for allowing me to share that. I'll share the CRSE competencies, and then, like I said, please feel free to connect with me. I'll share my contact information in the chat.
Dr. Roy, thank you so much. You represent a very important part of the conversation. And thank you for talking about it from the perspective of how at the education level, one of the things that has kept a lot of students from color from entering this conversation is because they didn't feel welcome in the education departments. And historically, we find a lot of there, you know, particularly when, as Ms. Robson talked about it, post segregation, there was a move against it, like by having schools of education require students to have pre-interest tests, post-interest tests to be certified, those kind of things that took them away from that, or they were not allowed to teach in certain schools versus others, and those were the ones that turned them away. So it's great to have you give that lens about, you know, because one of the things that we want to do is have people in the community help identify, recruit, and encourage people to be teachers. But we need it, if we're going to send them to schools, has to be schools that they feel safe, welcome, and a part of. So thank you.
And it personally matters to me too. I have a child in TE, so you know, I want him to have diverse teachers. I want him to have teachers who teach from an anti-racist perspective. So yeah, so thank you, everybody.
No, thank you. So the next piece that we're going to do is we're going to hear from 3 practitioners and folks who work in the ground and the work and about their perspective, some of the works they did. The first person that we're going to hear from is Maureen Clark. Maureen Clark is biracial American born in Venezuela, a Venezuelan mother and a white father. She is from Wilmington, Delaware, and graduated from Concord High School. She went on to complete her bachelor's at Westchester and received a master's from Cabrini. Maureen has taught in Great Valley for the past 15 years and currently a first grade teacher. In collaboration with her fellow educators of color in her district, she is working to recruit and retain a more diverse teaching staff, as well as create a more culturally competent district. Maureen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anthony, for the introduction. And thank you for being here. So my passion for equity in education stems from personal and professional experiences. So bear with me for a few little personal things, then I'll get to the professional stuff. So I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, Roslyn. At the time, it was primarily white. I went to the local Catholic school down the street, St. John of the Cross. My teachers were all white. Majority of my classmates were white. Book characters, movie characters, guest speakers, white, white, white. Being in a world of white can make you feel like the odd person out. it makes you feel like the other, like everyone knows who you're talking about, you know, that other one. And as a kid, feeling like the other, all I wanted to do was blend in. Now I know the importance of standing out now. I've grown from that. But, you know, then it was one of my biggest fears. And my mom felt this way too. With her dark skin and limited English, she didn't always feel comfortable coming to my school without my dad. But it's kind of how it was. And in turn, I was on the shyer side. I didn't stand up for myself. I didn't stand up for myself when I got teased by my classmates. I didn't stand up for myself when my teacher made fun of my lunch. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. But you know, I just tried to blend in. And it's actually one of the reasons that I became an educator, thinking, I don't want anyone to feel that way. Now, obviously, everyone has different experiences, but if there's one person that felt the way that I did, I just wanted to do something, do what I could. So, as you all probably know, visual representation matters to all students, both the underrepresented and the mainstream. Speaking of the underrepresented population, studies have shown attendance and graduation rates increase, there are lower disciplinary referrals, and more pursue higher education. And some that I think people don't often talk about, the mainstream benefit as well. They develop better problem solving and critical thinking skills. They gain new perspectives and improve in their social emotional learning. Now, as a parent, this is something I look for in my children's education. So my daughter qualified for this program, the gifted program in my home district, and they do a self-contained model. But before I let her participate, I wanted to talk to the principal, find out what does this look like? What's the curriculum like? Is it culturally competent? And one of the things I didn't tell him in the beginning was that I was looking at all the teachers in the program, and every teacher was white. And I don't know, I just felt it's 2021. My daughter qualified for this great program. I shouldn't be second guessing whether or not she should participate because she would only experience, teachers that weren't of color. Now, we did end up putting her in because, as you know, representation matters, and all of those teachers are going to see my beautiful brown baby thrive. They're going to see her in all her glory. Now, professionally, as mentioned in my intro, my colleagues and I are also working to recruit and retain more educators of color in our district. The educators of color in our district were already small in number, and then we had some retire, so there were even less. On our opening day in fall 2019, I do a big thing, you know, the theme for the year, lots of fun getting to see your friends. And then they also introduced the new hires. So one by one, the new hires were called. They walked to the front of the room. All but maybe one or two were white. None of our retirees were replaced with educators of color. And again, our numbers are low. Out of pure frustration, my colleagues and I came together to address this disappointment with our admin. We became an affinity group, and I'm lucky to have Lisa, my partner in crime. She's here, and she's going to talk more about it with our admin, Dr. Wexler, sorry. And it's just hard to see, you know, going through that experience as a child and then professionally, when you imagine all of these things that are going to change, and it's more of the same. So far, our progress has been slow, but there are positive steps we're working on. I'm thankful to be working with my colleagues, like I mentioned, Lisa and Dr. Wexler, and the other Anthony Stevenson is here from Great Valley, and the Dr. Stevenson invited us here today. So from this struggle and and challenge, it's brought a lot of great people together to think of our students. So that's what I have for you. Thanks for listening.
Clark, thank you so much for sharing your perspective from not only from a personal perspective, because I think it's important for us to understand that this is not just about, again, about professional placement, about what impact it has, and the long-term pieces. You talk about how, as from a child to an adult, this still sticks with us. The same thing is important for us as to understand as educators, these kids who are in front of us, that it makes a lasting impression, and not only about kids of color, but kids across the board, to see these diverse role models. So thank you. Our next speaker is Helen Lee. Helen Lee is a Korean American whose parents immigrated to the United States from South Korea. She is from Elkins Park, PA, and graduate of Cheltenham High School, Temple University, and received her master's from Columbia University. She's taught at Abington High School, PSMS 61 in Harlem, and is currently a mathematics teacher at Wissahickon Middle School. She is also a member of the Wissahickon Education Alliance, Educators for Racial Equity, and the Wissahickon School Board Racial Equity Oversight Committee. Ms. Lee.
Hi, everyone. I'm Helen Lee. Thank you again, Dr. Stevenson, for having me and just the opportunity to share a little bit similar to Maureen. I'm going to start a little bit about my personal story, and then I'll kind of get into just the importance of recruiting and retaining teachers of color. So as Dr. Anthony introduced, I am Korean American. I am second generation Korean American, and my parents immigrating from Korea, South Korea, not knowing much English. My father had graduated from college in Korea, came with an engineering degree, but due to the lack of resources and also not understanding the language, left him with very little opportunity to actually apply his engineering degree. My mother, coming from a large family, she was not afforded the opportunity to go to college. She graduated from high school and then immigrating with my father here. So their opportunity in terms of kind of achieving the American dream were very limited due to their lack of network, as well as their lack of opportunity to learn the language and receive an American degree. With that being said, they kind of started from the bottom up and working blue collar jobs, started little small businesses here and odd end jobs and such. So for me, growing up, I have an older sister. My sister and I are very much the latchkey kids, meaning our parents were working all the time, almost 12-hour days, almost 6-7 days a week. So very little parental support. Not to say that they didn't want to be there, but because coming to America for them, it was really their work, blood, sweat, and tears were to send us to school, to get the American education, to get the degree, to provide us the opportunity to have the things that they could not. So coming from that background and understanding growing up, that was very much instilled in us that, hey, you guys need to do better. You guys need to make most of the opportunity. And going through the American education system, there were obviously moments, and I can vaguely remember maybe one teacher, Mrs. Han, that was an Asian American teacher that I've had I would say, in my K-12 public education experience. Not to say Cheltenham High School was Cheltenham School District is a very diverse community. And I think growing up in the apartment complex that I did was a very diverse community as well. So I was lucky enough to be afforded those types of interactions. Again, going through the public education system, not really seeing anyone that looked like me. Again, not being able to kind of share in some of the cultures or even the language aspect. My sister and I were the ones who had to navigate through reading the documents. We were the ones that had to make the decision of what courses to take, what courses not to take. And after years, I've come to realize I've actually repeated a course that no one noticed. And again, it was due to the lack of being able, and again, you can say, well, your parents should have been the one to navigate that for you. But again, coming from an immigrant household, the responsibility oftentimes fell on my sister and myself to kind of navigate these waters. Kind of fast forward into going into the university and deciding on what career path I wanted to choose. I realized that I was able to be successful throughout my education in high school. And I realized that I wanted to be someone, a mentor to other young students, not just students of color, but I think for me, coming from the position of having very blue-collar working parents who weren't available and who weren't able to be as involved for whatever reason, because they were pretty much just making ends meet. And oftentimes throughout even just my interaction with people, and still today, oftentimes, because I'm Asian American, it doesn't matter that we're not a monolithic community. You look Asian, so we're just lumped into one. The very much model minority myth. And so for me, there's a component as I went through my education program, and people would assume, oh, your parents are doctors or your parents are engineers. And that would I would catch me off guard a little bit, because that is nowhere near where my story begins. And so after graduating and having the opportunity to work with students, and Abington Abington School District was my first job opportunity. And I was thankful because I felt like I could connect with a lot of students where many of their parents were very much blue collar. And so recognizing that education was a gateway to success. And also I was able to be involved. There was a pretty significant Asian American community to be connected with other students. And oftentimes students would say, oh, you're the first Asian teacher that I ever had. And not only being able to connect in that way by having Korean American students as well, they felt very comfortable in sharing in some of the culture and the language if they were unable to translate, or to, if there were ESL students, they would come and speak to me. So to kind of connect that back into why recruiting and retaining teachers of color is important. And I think the common thread is representation matters. And whether or not sometimes I may realize it, there are students that I didn't even teach that would come, like pass by me in the hallway and recognize and say, oh, Mrs. at the time, Miss Park, or even now, Mrs. Lee. They know, I'm pretty much the only Asian American teacher at my middle school. And so kind of being the point person or someone that they can connect with, even though I don't teach them. And so having that connection for students is important because they can see themselves in the school. They can see themselves as someone who has a professional career. But I think also not only for their own personal success, I have a couple notes here, but also building the relationship where home and school and the community, it's not so separate, that there is a level of trust. And we all know, right, that in schools, due to systemic racism, there are issues that happen in schools. And if there are no proper policies in place, our students of color have no one to report these things to. And so in my time as an educator, I've had many students come to me, not to the guidance counselors, come to me because they feel like, Mrs. Lee will understand because she is a minority teacher, and Mrs. Lee is able to translate and speak to the parents. And oftentimes the Korean speaking parents would feel just a sense of like, there's somebody that can understand me without even having to share their life story. So making that home and school connection is significant. And so kind of just to sum it up, right, when we think about recruiting and retaining teachers of color, the importance is that representation matters, not only in the students' academic success, but also connecting the school with the community. And I do hope that as we continue the conversation, that we would consider, and some things that I was reflecting upon for other school districts, well, how do we recruit and where do we go to recruit? Oftentimes that's the question. Well, there's just not enough teachers anyways to begin with. And some ways that for me, where what does the hiring practice look like? And that is a question that, to be quite honest, I'm challenging with Sahikin, my current school district. What is the hiring practices? Unfortunately, has anybody approached the other teachers of color in our district to be part of that team? Have you reached out to religious institutions, right? The Korean community is heavily involved in churches. Have you reached out to the church, the Korean church down the street? There's a Chinese American church literally down the street from our campus. Have you reached out to them to make connections? And so thinking very much outside of the box and bringing the teachers of color into the conversation to help make those connections. And most importantly, looking at the culture of the school. So in order to retain teachers of color, are you creating an environment where we feel safe, where if there are incidents of racism, we have someone to talk to? Because if we feel isolated and alone, if there's no one that we can share our story with, and if there's no one that can see us for who we are and the value that we bring to the school and our students, then there's no reason to be part of that community. Whether the pay is great or not, if we don't feel a sense of belonging, just like our students, if they don't see themselves, and if they don't feel a sense of belonging, then why invest in coming to class? In the same way with the staff of color, why invest in this community who do not see us? And so thank you for listening. I hope it wasn't too long-winded and that it can really be helpful in kind of our goal as a community, as educators. So thank you again, Dr. Stevenson and everyone else here.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, thank you so much for drawing on this. I'm personally proud, being that I was your former administrator back in the day. So I would like to, it's great to see you talk about those things, not only your life experience, but also you touched on an important piece to say that, one of the things that I said earlier, but you kind of personally talked about it, is that, it's not about people saying like, okay, we have this much money or we are in this great district, but if people don't feel that they're going to be a part of it, so whatever districts are going to do about recruitment, they're going to have to show that they really want to be a part of it, and that they want you to be a part of the community. And it's not about assimilation, it's about acculturation by acknowledging that you bring a diversity here, but that's going to be welcome, not something that we want you to come on board to be a part of this whole piece to blend in. We want this whole piece of this cultural salad bowl, as we call it. And it's important that people feel a part of that. And so thank you for talking about all that, but really honing on that experience as a teacher and in the work that you challenging folks at Wissahickon. Our next speaker is going to talk about it from a more global piece, speaking as a UNISERV representative from the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Ms. Monet Riley is a UNISERV representative for the PSEA, one of the state's teachers union. Outside of contract negotiations and mediating labor disputes, she has been very instrumental in launching various programs in her region to engage members of her union, particularly of color, and to build a community where they feel welcome and appreciated in the education realm. So welcome.
Thank you everyone for having me here tonight. So again, my name is Monet Riley. I actually live in Havertown, so this is under my local NAACP branch. I'm a parent to a 2nd and 4th grader in Manoa Elementary School. So outside of my work, obviously this is very important to me as well, with representation for my children. So before I get into a little more what I'm doing with the union, On a community level, I am a chairperson for the BIPOC Parents Group of Haverford Township. And for Black History Month, we actually are holding a book drive for the point of representation. I know Maureen spoke a little bit earlier about not being represented in books, and that's something that we wanted to make sure that our children in the future were going to be represented. And to date, we have received over 700 books with that depicts students of color and children of color and authors of color for Black History Month. We received a grant from the Haverford Foundation for $1,500 to purchase more books, and we've also gotten $700 in cash donations. So this is something that obviously was very, very important to our community, and we are just really honored that through that work, we're going to be able to provide a little piece of that representation back to our community district. And all of the books are being donated to the school district, where they'll be distributed in the libraries and in the classrooms. So getting into kind of what brought me to the union, I formerly worked at a cyber charter school where I was a family coach, which is kind of a mix of a home and school visitor and truancy officer. And I actually formed and created and organized the union that was there after there were layoffs that really disproportionately affected the number of Black staff that they had on. Being in the union is really a great networking opportunity that I don't feel like a lot of people talk about enough. For example, I know Helen, I service her UNISERV for Wissahickon. I also know Lisa, who's going to speak soon, from when I was a local leader in the Mideast, in the Southeast region, and we met through the union and union activities. So knowing that I had those experiences and built a really large network and community with other educators of color through the union, that's something that when I became a staff member coming from the local leader side, that I wanted to make sure that I fostered in my work here. As you may know or not know, about 49.5% of the state's teachers of color do work in Philadelphia. So the rest are kind of spread out. We have in my office, which is the Mideast region, we cover all the schools in Bucks and Montgomery counties. We have some schools that have 0 educators of color. We have some that have 1. So the way that it works is in some regions, like the region here in Delaware and Chester County, they have what's called a Minority Affairs Committee. And that's where different educators of color or educators who are allies can come and they meet about those topics. They have a space to talk. In my region, when I came on, we did not have that. We just had 1 state rep. So starting last year, I started to put together some programs that can kind of help build that community for our educators, so that if they are alone on that island, maybe they're that one teacher working at a district, they have somewhere that they can come where they can meet other educators of color, where they can talk. So we started a Reaching for Better series, which was a multimedia kind of book club, but we also did podcasts on different parts of biases and fragility, and we did Nice White Parents, and really kind of, like I said, once again, having that space to talk. From there, we involved into creating a framework, which we're calling Catalyst for Change. So right now, this is a pilot program. We just launched it to all of our locals. That's the local union within each school. And it really is to challenge them to look within themselves and within their districts to make sure that if they want to do equity work, that they're doing it the right way. Some of those things are, fostering an environment where non-majority voices are being heard, making sure you're seeking input for those voices when you're surveying staff about different items. How are you engaging those minority members in terms of opportunities for leadership, in terms of going with HR to maybe some job fairs, or having discussions when people have their labor management meetings to making sure those voices aren't drowned out. Making sure that they're getting involved in the union. We offer a lot of Act 48 events. We have a Minority Affairs Conference once a year that brings together educators of color across the state. It actually has a few other conferences mixed in, but you see a lot of diversity at that conference, and makes people feel, once again, not so alone, especially when you get across the state and those numbers are even smaller. Outside of work, we are looking at doing programs that, something that we're working on, that I'm working on personally through a fellowship that I'm doing. I also see people in here that are with me in my fellowship, is creating a program to help teachers of color who, so right now, the majority of teachers live within about 6 miles of where they grew up, or work within 6 miles of where they grew up. So how can we get those teachers pushed out to other districts that don't have educators who are minorities? So I talked to Dr. Stevenson a little bit about it, and I'm working on a program where maybe we can offer some kind of incentives to get those teachers out to other districts. So we're hoping to have more information on that soon. But one thing that we came out with the charge of our first Minority Affairs Committee, because now we don't have a state person, we actually have a working committee of 21 people across various districts, which was amazing, is making sure that we're tapping all students on the shoulder and telling them they would make a great teacher. We had Sharif El-Mekki come speak at a panel that we did, I think a month and a half ago. And he said when he was in a group of Black educators, Black male educators, and they asked, you know, when did someone tell you that you would make a good teacher? They said never. While when they asked women, particularly white women, they were told around 3rd grade. So when we left that first meeting, we left with that charge of everyone needs to make sure that they are telling young Black and brown children that they are going to be great teachers one day, and making sure that they are recruiting them in a positive way to the profession, and also tapping your high school students. I mean, from freshmen to senior, they're 5 to 8 years away from becoming a teacher, and making sure that, once again, you're being positive and speaking about the profession in a positive way, because there's a lot of negative things about teachers in the world. So we are doing a lot on the union side to make sure that teachers have that community, no matter what district that they end up at. And we hope to, once again, be able to present a little more information on the programs that we're rolling out, you know, maybe in some follow-up meetings that we have here. So thank you again for having me. I will put my personal email in the chat box if anyone has any follow-up questions. And again, I appreciate everyone's time here that has come to learn more about this work and about diversifying our teaching staff.
Ms. Riley, thank you for sharing, particularly sharing about the perspective of how you've put your energy in the group of putting together, thinking out the box beyond just having a recruitment fair or going to some type and posting. It's about going out, meeting folks in the community, encouraging folks to think beyond just the business as usual. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to hearing more things from you in the future. So now we're going to make a little shift to now talking about the leadership of those districts, listening from districts about the work they're doing and the leadership. The key component becomes, you know, a lot of times we put it on the districts, but it's also on the flip side about the community. And we've heard about that from our speakers before, about how the practitioners feel and what their needs are, and how they feel. But now we're going to hear from a district talking about their model, and that is Great Valley. And we have with us Dr. Joanna Wetzler, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Administrative Services, which includes HR in Great Valley School District, and who her co-presenter will be Miss Lisa Phoenix, who Lisa is an intervention teacher at Great Valley, also a member of the County Council for Diversity and Inclusion. She also just completed her diversity inclusion certificate from the Cornell University. So welcome.
Thank you. Would it be okay to screen share, Anthony? Is that, I just have a couple of slides.
Sure. We'll take care of that for you.
Okay. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. Full disclosure, I'm fairly new to my role. So prior to that, I was a director of student services for Great Valley School District. So, you know, I have a lot of passion around equity work from a background of working and fighting for students with disabilities. It's always been a part of who I am, and my background prior to that was being a psychologist.
You can share your screen now if you like.
Oh, thank you. So I began the role in, one sec here. Oops. Okay. I began this role in July this summer. So we are, you know, we talked, I think in our former meeting that we were invited to, there was some discussion about baseline data and the importance of really just establishing with the community sort of where you are. And that's something that Great Valley really has never done around any work in this area. So up until this past summer, we have been 97% white. And that includes our professional staff and our administrative staff, so our teaching staff and administrative staff. In fact, on our administrative staff, which is about, I think we're at 35 currently,